This is Emily Blackshear with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. Today is Friday, January 31st, 2020, and I'm in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This afternoon, I'm interviewing Brad McLelland for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Brad, you're a novelist and co-author of the middle grade series Legends of the Lost Causes, which take young readers on an action-packed Wild West fantasy adventure. You, along with your co-author, Louis Sylvester, also won the Oklahoma Book Award in 2019.
We did.
Yeah.
Very fortunate.
Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, well, let's start with where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay. I was born in Dermott, Arkansas. I know you have Arkansas ties as well.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. Dermott, Arkansas is down there close to the Mississippi line, actually, near Lake Village and McGee. We're talking Delta. And that's where I was born, in a little hospital in Dermott. We've talked also in the background about Paragould.
Yes.
My mom was from Paragould. That's where she was born. Mm-hmm. So my family always lived in sort of that Delta tract of Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. Paragould's on the northeast corner, for those of you who don't know.
That's right. It's still considered Delta, but it's more in that Crowley's Ridge kind of Delta.
Yeah.
But that's where my mom was born. And then I don't exactly know when the McMickle family, my mom's side of the family, moved down into the Dermott area. But that's where my parents met, and that's where I was born. I lived in Dermott, Arkansas until I was probably about 5 years old. So I do have like sparkles of memory about Dermott, but more visiting Dermott. Most of my growing up years were done in North Louisiana. South Arkansas, North Louisiana. So when I was about 5 years old, my family moved. We moved to just outside a little town called Junction City, and it sits right there on the border of South Arkansas, North Louisiana. In fact, it has two city halls, like one on the Arkansas side, one on the Louisiana side. And grew up on this little country road outside Junction City. Commuted to school in El Dorado, Arkansas, which is in Union County, the largest county geographically in Arkansas. It kind of sits right there at the bottom, and it's this kind of big block of geography. That's where El Dorado is where I went to school, where I found all my friends. That's sort of where I officially hang my hat in terms of what I call a hometown. But I could also claim Junction City as a hometown for me as well. Most of the time we were going up and down Highway 167 to go to school from Junction City, about a 30-45 minute drive into El Dorado. So that was kind of my life, was just traveling from South Arkansas to North Louisiana to South Arkansas and back and back and back and back, kind of splitting my life between those two states, really. So yeah, that's where I'm from. It was really fun to live out there, among cousins. I had a lot of cousins that lived outside Junction City with me. We were all sort of grouped together. So we hit the trails on our three-wheelers together. We played all the time. It was a lot of fun to play out there.
How would you describe the landscape of that part of Arkansas to someone or Louisiana to someone who's never been?
Well, I remember lots of pine trees. There were so many pines, and you always had to worry about ticks and things like that. But there weren't very many hills to explore. I mean, the geography was it was nothing like further up in the Jonesboro region where you just have flat rice land. It didn't really feel much like Delta land or swampy. It was just sort of basic. It had lots of pine trees, lots of like forests to explore. There were lots of pipelines where cut right through the forest land where we would go horseback riding and things like that. So to me, I guess you wouldn't call it hill land or flat land, but something in between, really. You weren't even really in what I would call Louisiana territory at that point, where you get into more swampy stuff. We didn't really have that sort of geography. It was a little bit more basic.
So you mentioned your mom. Can you tell me a little bit more about her? What she liked? What she liked to do, hobbies, stuff like that?
Absolutely. My mom, she's I consider her my best friend to this day. We've always been extremely close. Her name's Barbara. She taught me how to read and write. When we moved from Dermot to Junction City and started commuting to El Dorado to go to school, she taught me throughout my entire, she taught me in kindergarten. I think she taught me going into first grade. She was right down the hall when I was in middle school. So she was very close. We told stories to each other in the car whenever we would be together. I have lots of fond memories of growing up watching spooky movies with her out there in the countryside where we lived in North Louisiana. We had a trampoline, and I remember that Mom and I would lie on that trampoline and look up at the stars and tell ghost stories to each other. So I think those early memories of just being so close to Mom and telling stories with Mom and hearing stories from Mom really sort of implanted that imagination that I feel like I still have. She read a lot to me. She encouraged reading. She was always putting a new book in my hands, always finding cool things for me to read. So, my mom is my best friend, and I definitely consider her one of the most important people in my life for who I have become, in terms of an influence.
What's your earliest creative memory? Did you write stories when you were younger, or come up with plays, or you're into music?
I did. I got into music. I remember one of my first official creative acts was writing a short story by hand about a haunted rocking chair.
Oh, those ghost stories paid
those
off.
Ghost stories really paid off. I had so much sort of free time. I would play with my cousins, but my siblings, my brother, my two sisters, my half brother and two half sisters, rather, they were older than I was and am, so I never really got a chance to hang out with them all that much. So when I wasn't hanging out with cousins, I was really kind of on my own. And so hence being very close to Mom. And whenever I would go off alone into the woods or sit in my treehouse or sit in the horse pasture, I remember that I would write in this little journal. And I had a diary, but I don't remember doing much diary entries. It was more story writing. And I was really emulating things that I was reading at the time. So I was probably reading some spooky stuff. I remember writing this story about a haunted rocking chair. I think I called it something as creative as the haunted rocking chair. And probably this is a true story. My mom probably still has that story somewhere in a box.
Great to get out.
Oh yeah, she has collections of old stuff that she still finds publishable to this day. And I will argue with her, Mom, I don't know if the old haunted rocking chair story is quite publishable, when I wrote it when I was a 10-year-old. But anyway, that's sort of one of the first creative things I remember. And then through middle school, I tinkered with spooky stories and like historically based stories because I love to read historical fiction. And I remember in high school, I wrote about the first Iraqi war, and I was fictionalizing some stuff about Saddam Hussein. So my imagination ranged everywhere, and I think it was all implanted there because of those fond memories I have with my mom, just telling those spooky stories.
What were books early on that were influential to you? We can go back to childhood or teenage years.
I really loved 19th century, the more historical adventure stories. So think Jack London, Call of the Wild. I loved H.G. Wells. So I got into H.G. Wells, Jack London, folks like that. And I really read them like crazy. I also read a lot of older stuff. Like I remember when I was much younger trying to get through Moby Dick. I didn't really understand it as much, but the length of a book never really, turned me off. I always considered it more of a world if you saw a giant book. And I was like, wow, that author really had it going on. They had a lot to say. So I remember flipping through Moby Dick, the old copy that we had, probably a paperback, going, I don't really understand this, but I think it's pretty cool. And I, like I mentioned, H.G. Wells, and Reading earlier works like The Three Musketeers really informed me. I loved anything with action and adventure. If I had to pinpoint a moment in time in my childhood where I felt like I could do what the author was doing, was when my mom brought home from, I think it was a garage sale. She brought home a book written by a guy named Robert Arthur Jr. And he wrote, for many years, he wrote the Three Investigators Junior Detective Series. Mm-hmm. And she found one called The Secret of Terror Castle. And it was right at my alley. It was the kind of stuff that I really loved because, I was already, reading dark fiction from Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne and piecing all those harder to grasp pieces of prose together in my mind. But I knew that I loved them, even though I may not have understood a whole lot of the language. I loved that darker stuff. So along comes Robert Arthur, and I start reading The Three Investigators about, I think it was Pete Crenshaw and Jupiter Jones, and I can't remember the names, the name of the third boy, Andrew or something. But they were just this little detective agency, and they went around and they uncovered spookiness, and they investigated spooky occurrences in castles and around lakeside cottages and things like that. They were so much fun, and I do remember that I was constantly asking my mom, if you find another Three Investigators book, be sure to pick it up. And she would always bring me a Three Investigators book, and I would just blast through it. So I think that is the moment when, in my mind as a youth, I probably became a young adult writer. Yeah. At that moment when I realized, wow, the language of this is really attainable, but also the darkness and the fun stuff and the adventure is also attainable, and it's in a package that I like. So that was sort of officially one of the first truly memorable, fun middle grade experiences I had reading. Of course, I was reading things in school as well, like Heidi, other required reading, but I really had a blast with those Three Investigators books.
Yeah, Heidi wasn't as much fun.
Heidi wasn't as much fun as Jupiter Jones, cracking the case and Terror Castle.
Yeah, so when you were younger, did you aspire to become an author and writer, or?
Indeed, I did.
Okay.
Ever since I was probably 8 or 10 years old, I always knew I wanted to be an author. I remember having so many conversations with my mom about it, and she would help me brainstorm pseudonyms. Mm-hmm. One time I remember we came up with the pseudonym Brad L. Shaw, and we thought that would be this really cool, cryptic sounding pseudonym. I always talked about wanting to be an author. Mm-hmm. And then, as I made my way into high school, that desire to see my own work only increased. As I started reading more complex works like Ray Bradbury and Stephen King, I really got the bug. Yeah. And I knew I wanted to do something with this. So I graduated from journal and diary short story entries to an old typewriter that my mom brought home. And I would clickety-clack on that old typewriter. And I wrote a werewolf story on that old typewriter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Millville Ridge was the name of my town in that. I remember the specifics about that werewolf story. And then I progressed from the clickety-clack typewriter to an electric typewriter. And I don't want to put money down on this, but I would almost wager that my mom still has that typewriter somewhere in her house right now. But
take it out.
Take it out. Yeah. But I remember the progression. It was very clear when I was a kid, writing, typing, getting a better means to type, finding ribbons that I could, reinstall in the typewriter when the ink would go dry. I remember those struggles. I was thinking, I got to fix this so I can write. So I think if my mother were sitting here beside me today, she would say, yes, Brad always wanted to be a writer. One thing you aren't aware of when you're 10, though, is that trajectory and how exactly it will look. You think it's going to be some sort of magic.
Yeah. Or like a movie or
this chapter. In this chapter, I will become a writer. And it's not quite that smooth as most writers will find out. And there is a long trajectory for me to get there. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun growing up and, with such a creative parent behind me, and the ability to go off and be in my quiet place. I talk a lot about that quiet place with students when I talk about writing with students when I visit schools. That quiet place that you find when you're a kid is absolutely integral to the writer you're going to become. I think, learning how to escape, find your quiet place, whether it be woods or a porch or a library.
Where was yours? Is it the woods? Or?
The woods. We raised horses, so we had this horse pasture out in the middle of nowhere, and I would take the three-wheeler that we drove all over the woods. I would take that three-wheeler to the horse pasture and sit by the pond, and I'd put on some headphones when walkies were new. You remember those?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd put the headphones on and listen to music while I wrote. That was my quiet place, was like the woods. Eventually my dad, when I was later on in middle school, I remember that my dad built a tree house in the woods behind our backyard, and I escaped to that tree house relentlessly. Sometimes if I had permission, I would go up into that tree house at night. Mom always thought that I would fall out of the tree house at night if I wasn't careful.
Yeah, I'd be worried about that.
So I would always go to my tree house, or I would always go to the horse pasture, or I would always go off into the woods and just read and write. In that way, I remember very fondly growing as a writer and a reader, finding that quiet place. It's really important.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you bring that up.
Yeah.
So where did your educational path take you after high school?
So after high school, I went to University of the Ozarks, and this is also in Arkansas. It was in the foothills in, what was the name of that county? I can't remember the name of the county, but it was in Clarksville, Arkansas, right there off of I-40, right past Russellville. Really quaint community, absolutely beautiful. You talk about steeped in just imagination. I couldn't have chosen a better university to go to cultivate my imagination, because we could escape into those Ozark foothills, and I could go on these long walks, these nature walks, and just see some of the most beautiful scenery. So it was probably 1993 to 1999 or somewhere in there, 1994 to 99. I took a year off, I think 94, 95, after my freshman year, to help my mom pay some bills. She and my father were going through a divorce. So I decided to be as responsible as I could, pay her back for everything that she had done for me, just by kind of, staying with her for a year in South Arkansas. And then I returned to University of the Ozarks after, I guess it was 96 or so, and finished out my degree. And
what did you major in?
English. Yeah, I started out in...
I was going to say English.
Yeah, you would think naturally it would be. I actually started my freshman year as a theater major. Of course, with the passion for story and the passion for all things imagination, I thought that I might enjoy going into theater and doing some things there, even if it were behind the scenes. But I quickly discovered that I would rather do English when they made me start doing things in theater that I wasn't very good at. So I made the transition. While I was there, I also took some classes on print journalism, which ended up becoming a career path for me after college. So I'm glad I took those courses when I did, or I may never have done that. So I was an English major. My good friend Ben Myers, the former Oklahoma poet laureate, he was also there. We were very good college buddies. We helped run the small literary magazine called Falstaff. I was the fiction editor. He was the poetry editor. And I remember having a lot of fun times down in the basement of the English department with our literary friends, talking about the merits of a story that was going to go in this new edition, things like that. We always had a lot of fun there.
And you've kept in touch.
We have. Yeah, we actually have. There, pretty much every year, I think Ben and I have had some sort of communication with each other. When I came to Oklahoma, I made sure to track him down, and we made sure to track each other down. And we've touched base ever since, and we've both been sort of going in various different directions with our career paths. But and he's so super busy with everything he has going on. But we do try to get together as often as possible. We played some music together when I was in college. We were in a couple of bands. One was called Idols of the Tribe. We were very philosophical.
Not surprising.
Yeah. And then we started a band, another band with his sister Anna, and she was our lead singer. We were called the Subterranean Homesick Blues Band, and we were more of a blues band. And we had so much fun. It was a larger band. We had about 6 or 7 members.
Oh, wow.
And we played around, that track of Arkansas a little bit. We played in Eureka Springs. So it was a lot of fun going to University of the Ozarks. I have a lot of fond memories with the Myers, for sure.
Yeah. And did you start working as a journalist right after college, or can you tell me about what happened next with your writing career?
Yeah, pretty much immediately after. I mean, I knew I didn't want to be that student to walk out of college with a piece of paper and nothing else on the table. So, I looked around. My hometown was hiring for a county beat reporter, someone who could cover county news down in Union County, as well as basically cover crime. And I was like, how intriguing would that be to learn a little bit about, not only the journalism, learn a little bit more about that, but also just learn about people. And that was my sort of selfish take on being a journalist. I thought this could help me become a better writer. So I applied, and pretty much that, I think I started with the El Dorado News-Times as their new county beat reporter in Christmas 1999. It was the holiday right after I graduated from University of the Ozarks. And I really hit the door running. And I learned a lot within about a 6-month curve about people and, reputation and deadlines and, all sorts of things I learned by being a journalist. And I also got to meet a very important mentor in my life, Jim Patterson, who ended up becoming not only my best friend, but probably one of the most important writing mentors I've ever had. He was the outgoing county beat reporter. He was stepping up at the El Dorado News-Times to become an editor, a desk editor. And so he was tasked with teaching me the ropes. And I remember, hearing the story from Jim's perspective when he heard that he would have to train this new snot-nosed kid, out of a small liberal arts school to be a journalist, a hard-hitting journalist. And, he said, he always joked that he took one look at me and said, I'm going to eat this kid for breakfast, And he did. He was very intimidating. The first time I saw Jim, the first day that I walked into the News-Times to be this new guy, this new reporter, Jim was wearing this black leather Donnie Brasco jacket. He had long brown hair. At the time, he was smoking a cigarette, and he was driving this Batmobile-looking black Mustang. He was just the epitome of oh my goodness, who is this guy? So he would walk me around downtown and introduce me to people, tell me about important relationships I would need to cultivate. He would tell me about personalities. He would tell me how to write leads. He would drive me out to places that were important, like the sheriff's department, introduce me to deputies and investigators. He knew everyone. He knew everyone in the county, and everyone respected Jim Patterson. The second we walked into any office, people really paid attention because they knew that he was a hard-hitting journalist and that he would, always get the story right. So one of the very first lessons I learned from Jim was, making sure that you carry yourself with enough respect that people are going to want to talk to you, and that you do a good job, and you don't do something that could be considered disrespectful to a source, and you'll get pretty far. And so I just learned a lot about people and how to talk to people through Jim Pat. I called him Jim Pat a lot. And recently he passed away with cancer, and those memories all just came tumbling back about the first time I saw him. And when I spoke at his memorial this past summer, I talked about that black jacket and seeing him there for the first time, almost like a demigod, and just how important he was to me. And he was also, I mentioned that he was a creative mentor as well. In the process of teaching me just about journalism, he was also talking to me about his own fiction. And he had found out that I was a fiction writer, a would-be fiction writer, a wannabe. Mm-hmm. And we talked about our love for Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, and the all the stuff that I've mentioned previously. He had the same taste that I did. We talked for hours about stories that we had written. I told him about a novella that I had written in college, and he told me about a novella that he had written in college. And we swapped notes, and we discovered that thematically there was a lot of stuff that we had in common on the page as well. So we decided to collaborate on a book together called Kindred Spirit. It was going to be this like epic ghost story, a little bit of Flannery O'Connor-esque kind of Southern Gothicism at play. So on our breaks in the break room at the El Dorado News-Times, we would go down and we would talk about Kindred Spirit. We would make notes, and those are some of the fondest memories of my life. Yeah. Talking about that story with him, talking about writing, talking about philosophy and life and death with him. I will always cherish those memories with him. And sadly, we weren't able to do anything with Kindred Spirit. There for a while, we had a completed manuscript. We had people read it. They said that they loved it. But note to self, don't get your mom or your best friends to read your work. They will always love it.
Right.
So anyway, but we knew we had something special. We attempted to get an agent out of Little Rock, Arkansas one day, and that, was unsuccessful, complete failure. But we tried, and so we shelved it, and we would have to necessarily go our separate ways over the years to do various things. But we would always keep in touch about the story. On occasion, he would get in touch with me and he would say, "Hey, you want to brainstorm about Kindred Spirit? Maybe Friday evening?" I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And those were just so much fun. I remember when we were together in El Dorado, that they lived in Camden, Arkansas, just right up the road from El Dorado, in that Golden Triangle area that they call the Golden Triangle. And I remember sitting in his mom's house, drinking too many Diet Cokes on a Friday night. His mom would cook for us, and we would say something outrageously weird from the story, and his mom would just pipe up from the kitchen, "I don't think he would say that." So, "Oh, thank you." So, his mom was a dear friend, and I just have lots of really good memories about working on that novel with him. One of these days, as I promised during his memorial this past summer, one of these days I would love to take Kindred Spirit off the shelf again and, do something with that. Put a fresh spin to it, put a new, revision to it, and see if I can find a home for it and publish with his name alongside mine. I think that would be a fine dream to fulfill.
Yeah, it would, for sure.
Yeah.
I remember reading an editorial that he had written when he found out that he was sick, and I never met him. I don't know him, and he worked at some places that I've lived, but
Paragould, Arkansas.
Paragould of all things. But just the way he approached his diagnosis and looking at the end of his life that was coming up sooner rather than later, and you could really get a sense of his character, just how his voice came out.
He was extremely confident in everything that he wrote. He didn't hedge on any single word, whether it came to writing about politics or culture or anything, even his own imminent death. He was straight to the point, and for just to let folks aware, he died of pancreatic cancer in May 2019. He found out he had pancreatic cancer in March. So he when he found out he had stage 4 cancer, He was living in Colorado, and we were keeping in touch almost daily via text. Joking with each other, talking about when we're going to get to see each other again. And when he found out, he wrote that editorial for his newspaper in Colorado. This is probably going to be the thing that kills me. Here's what I've learned, and here's what I want you to take away from my life. And I shared that over Twitter. I shared that with my friends, and it really got out there. And everybody who read Jim's final words to his newspaper and to us were just overwhelmed with emotion, because it was so simply poetic. There was nothing complex about his words. He wasn't trying to say something that was outside the own scope of his understanding. He wasn't trying to figure something out on the page. He knew what kind of person he was. And he was telling people, I hope that you have appreciated me. I know I'm going to someplace better, but live while you're here. That was a huge message from him in his final words to everyone. Live while you're here. He told folks, I plan on going back to Arkansas, down into that area where he and I were journalists together.
Yeah, and he drove around, didn't he? He
did.
How did he live out those last few months? He did a lot of things.
He did. In April, after I found out, my wonderful day job at Fire Protection Publications allowed me to step away for about a week or so. And I went to Colorado, and they lived outside Steamboat Springs is where he was. And I stayed with him for about a week. We saw dinosaur bones in Utah. We went to go see Avengers Endgame. We ate pizza. It was clear he was in pain, and he was very emaciated. He had lost a lot of weight, and it was hard to see that. But he was clinging to himself. He wanted to travel around and see as many people as possible. At that time, in April of 2019, we were all under the assumption that he might still have some time to go get some more, check in with the doctor, find out a little bit more about what was going on with him, and maybe get some assistance. As it turns out, he didn't even have time to go see a doctor again. So he told people after my visit, that week I got to spend with him, he wanted to go back to Arkansas, spend some time with his family and friends, see his homeland, see the place where his folks were buried, and just kind of celebrate his life as an Arkansan down there. And that's what he did. He had some car issues, but he got his car fixed with some generous money from a GoFundMe campaign, and went down to Arkansas, saw his family. They threw parties for him. And on the way back, after he said basically goodbye to everyone, he stayed at my home one last time. He stopped in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And my stepdaughter gave him her bed for the night. And he spent the night there. And that was the last time I saw him, So he did get a chance to go see everyone, say goodbye properly. And we talked about kindred spirit again, about things. He told me that he really did hope that I would do something with the story eventually. So anyway, it was one of the situations in your life where when you're seeing your best friend passing before your eyes, your own life just starts to become, something that you kind of put under a microscope, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it, but you really start sort of analyzing your choices, analyzing the way you approach things. Do I want to rage on Facebook about the state of politics today? No, I don't. I think I would rather read a book today. Do I want to, spend my time doing this when I could be doing this? Always now, since losing him last year, I have heard his words in that newspaper column over and over again in my head. Live your life to the fullest. Go do what you need to do. So that's what I'm doing. I hope that's what I'm doing. I'm just listening to my heart and trying to be a good husband and stepfather, try to be a good friend to people, and celebrate art while I'm here. Try my best to do no harm, to write fun stories for kids, hopefully be an inspiration for people. Be an inspiration like my friend Jim.
Yeah.
And like my mom.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Wanted to go this relates to what we're talking about, becoming a writer, figuring out how to make your art. So you did get your MFA.
I did.
Right. Can you tell me about that?
I did. So when I was living in Jonesboro, I was also going through my own divorce at the time. And I hadn't really been doing as much I wanted to with my writing. I was a crime journalist. I was really enjoying being in journalism. There were things about journalism that I didn't like. But the act itself of writing was fun, but that wasn't the kind of writing that I wanted to do. So after moving to Jonesboro and becoming a journalist up there, I kind of sank in for a while and didn't really do as much with my creative writing. It was only after I started going through a divorce that I started coming back around to the notion that I could do something with my writing. So, I decided to become a non-traditional student and put myself through grad school. I haven't really looked at that option before. Let me go to grad school. I had always thought grad school could be an option, but I kind of sank into journalism for a while and I really kind of forgot about it. And then, so I started applying, and it was summer 2008 when I moved to Oklahoma. I had been accepted into the Oklahoma State University MFA program, which was brand new that year. I think I was actually the first person to sign the papers to get the first MFA. Don't quote me on that. But so I moved to Oklahoma summer 2008 and just sort of sank into that world all over again. I wanted to be around people who talked about writing. I wanted to see if I could open doors. I wanted to meet teachers who could teach me more about the craft. Mostly I just wanted the time to be able to get away from stuff that, the kind of time that an MFA program might be able to afford you to sit and write a work. I just wanted to see if I still had it in me. And actually, the summer right before I started the creative writing workshops, I worked in wheat fields.
Oh.
Yeah, I wanted some material to write about.
That'll do it.
So that did it, yeah. I actually ended up, I worked all summer in the wheat fields. I rogued wheat. I helped package wheat for a division on campus here in the agricultural division. And I learned a lot about wheat harvesting and wheat production, wheat distribution. I took extensive notes. I journaled every day while we were in those fields. I remember, on off times when we were sitting and watching a combine go by at 3 miles per hour, writing down the name of the combine. What was the serial number of the combine so I could look it up. Things like that. So that gave me some stuff to write about for my thesis. I knew I would need thesis material. How good of a writer am I going to be? Am I going to be able to write a full-length book for my thesis? Well, let me see. So I started the MFA. One of the first people that I actually got to meet, other than staff, was Louis Sylvester. Yeah. So I had come to a workshop to kind of sit in a workshop to see how they were, and Louis was one of the first people to talk to me. Such a nice guy. Just one of the nicest people I think I'd ever met. And he was so down to earth and approachable. I kind of marked him in my mind, really. I was like, that guy's going to end up being my friend. I really do think that. And so I went, he was getting his PhD, and I kind of at the same time was hoping that he could be a friend. I kind of saw him kind of melt into the background of, other PhD programs. I didn't really think that we would be in the same circles. And we really weren't all that much. But I started my MFA program. I sank into the workshops. I started learning a lot about the craft under the direction and the guidance of Tony Graham. And had a really good time. I learned a lot about patience. I learned a lot about, keeping your chin high when someone says something you may not like about your work. due diligence with revision, things like that. I read a lot of amazing work that I had never read before. I took a modernism class that I just absolutely loved. Going back to that 19th century stuff, I really sank into that late kind of modernism. So anyway, as I was sort of like making my way through the MFA program, I was also hanging out with some small circles. I feel like I was a bit of a recluse at OSU. While I was teaching and going to school here, I didn't quite get out all that much. But when I would get out and go to occasional gatherings and social get-togethers, I would run into Lewis, and we would talk. And the more and more we would talk, the more and more I just liked the fella. I mean, you know Lewis, you know how likable.
I shared an office with him.
Yeah, he's so likable and so wonderful to talk to.
Yeah, very nice.
And eventually we started talking more and more and more about things that we liked. What do you like to read? And I would tell him the stories that I've been telling you about all that old literature that I would take up, into my treehouse and read when I was a kid. And, I wrote a story about a werewolf one time. What about you? And he said that he loves sci-fi and fantasy and that he would gobble down, these fantasy epics all the time. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Finally, I can talk to someone about, maybe genre fiction that's not quite literary, but we can still keep it respectable. Let's keep it respectable. So anyway, we talked a lot about genre fiction, things we liked. The more and more we shared notes, the more we also realized that we really liked the genre of the Old West, and that there was a lot to like about the genre, and there was a lot of problems about the genre as well. But we really liked the story of True Grit. I've mentioned El Dorado as my sort of hometown. The author of True Grit is from El Dorado, Arkansas, Charles Portis. Unfortunately, never got to meet Charles Portis in El Dorado.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of a neat little thing. And when I read True Grit when I was younger, I remember just really loving the style of it, loving the 13 or 14-year-old MC, Maddie Ross. Lewis also really adores True Grit. And it's always been one of those kind of inspirational stories for us, and so fun and so funny. It's actually does humor very well, on top of being sort of like this sort of high literary action piece. It's a really unusual book in that it has a lot of action, but it's also got lots of humor, and it tells a very interesting moral story, all through the perspective of a youngster, of a young teenager. And we also loved Lonesome Dove, and we both compared notes about those old spaghetti westerns by Sergio Leone that I would watch with my dad growing up. Fistful of Dollars, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, things like that. We would always watch them, and so that was. I don't know if you want to transition now into it, but that was the birthplace of the Lost Causes.
Where did it come from? Yeah,
that's
the origin story.
That's Legends. The origin story of Legends of the Lost Causes was conversations with Lewis at parties and just about things that we loved. And we talked about the Old West as being one of those things that we love, and how the Old West has this potential for these huge, epic, sweeping moments that you can capture with this beautiful poetic lyricism, the way Lonesome Dove captured things. But what if we did it for kids? What if we captured that sort of spirit of the Old West and that sort of giant quality that the geography always held? And what if we encapsulate it within something that feels like the Goonies? And we just thought that would be a lot of fun. I was already writing about kids in my thesis. I was writing, my master's thesis at the time was called Father Abraham. And it centered a lot on children. And it centered a lot on, I guess, the darker things that kids can go through with irresponsible parents or with people who are not responsible. And there was a lot of disability narrative involved in some of that, based on some of the things that I saw as a journalist. So I was writing a lot about calamity and crime as they relate to kids, seeing what kind of thesis I was getting out of that. There were a lot of dark stories in that thesis, but it was only a matter of time talking to Lewis and comparing notes and having old ideas regenerate in the back of my head from when I was in college that I knew I could probably make the bridge from writing about kids to for kids. I think I want to write for kids. Why haven't I thought about that before? And almost at the same time, as Kismet would have it, one of my sisters, an older sister that I have named Pam, I rarely get a chance to see Pam, but she called me up one day out of the blue while I was in grad school. And she said, "Brad, do you want to know how to make $1 million?" And I said, "Please tell. I would love to know." And she said, I should mention this first, that she used to be a children's librarian in our hometown in Junction City. For a time, she did a lot of work in that library, and in the same library that I spent tons of hours in when I was a kid in Junction City. Well, when she worked there, she told me over the phone one day that she was seeing lots of kids come in asking for Western adventures or magical Western adventures. And she said she'd look on the shelves and they weren't there. She said, "Brad, you should write some of those." And that was when things started really clicking in place, because I had already had sort of this magical, dark Western concept in my mind from college that I never thought I would do anything with, about this dark outlaw and who's chasing sort of this relic. And talking with Lewis almost at the same time, although it just felt like planets were aligning at that moment. I think probably I know the next thing I want to do with my life. I think I want to get with Lewis and write the stuff that we love, you know? And so I sort of pitched this concept to him at our friend's birthday party. This would have been, I think, the early summer of 2010. I pitched him this concept that I was calling just the Lost Causes at the time, about a group of kids who would come together to fight evil. It would involve ancient relics on the loose, maybe cursed relics, and these really, really, really dark, you know, nasty outlaws who command some dark magic, getting after them, you know. And so Lewis really enjoyed the concept. Thereafter, we started just, you know, writing character sketches down on 3x5 cards. We would go to restaurants and sit and talk for hours just about plot points, and we would fill up just page after page of concepts.
Were you planning a series at that time? Did you want it to cover?
We actually were. Okay. We never really thought that it would just be one book. In fact, at the very beginning of the origin of this, I mentioned to Lewis, because the number 7 was stuck in my mind because of Harry Potter. And I was like, what if we told The Lost Causes in 7 books? Well, that's what started the conversation, but it very quickly became, what if we told the story in 4 books? You know, or what if we told the story as a trilogy or 4 books? And so we created basically a 4-book series on paper. Eventually down the road, we would work with our editor to whittle that down to a trilogy. Thank goodness, or we would have just wasted a lot of breath. But that's really how it started. We had notes for an entire trilogy, for a possible 4th book in that series if we needed it. We knew where we wanted to go with each story. We knew who the characters were going to be. We had them all down on paper. We had all the beats down. We just needed to activate it. And that was the point where I was thinking, okay, I've been in grad school, been struggling along with my thesis, not doing too badly on my thesis, but can I write a kid-lit book? And my mind started going back to all the kid-lit that I would read. And I started doing more homework on kid-lit and getting more involved in the kid-lit community. And that's when I started getting really excited. And it didn't take very long at all for me and Lewis to write the first draft of what is now Legends of the Lost Causes. Of course, it looks very different from when we first started.
Was that all in 2010 or?
Yeah, I believe it was. After that summer, we started in earnest drafting, or it was like during that summer, actually. So I remember that it was September 11th of, I'm trying to remember, it was September 11th, 2010 when we finished the first draft. So it only took about 4 or 5 months to write, and we wrote about 100,000 words, if not more. We were writing these gargantuan chapters. What we thought we had was not necessarily kid lit, but more young adult, because it was so dark. And it was a little bit more challenging material in there. And it was very different from what you see now in the book, but we had all the concepts down, you know. Kids, Keach Blackwood experiences a calamity, and, you know, he gets chased by this dark outlaw named Bad Whiskey Nelson. He finds more kids on the trail, and then they have to kind of pursue and in turn be pursued. That was all the same, but when we started working with our agent, our inevitable agent that we would get, we figured out we need to lower the age down and do some various things with the narrative.
How'd you find that agent? Because Lewis moved.
He did. Right. That's sort of all part of this interesting story, is that as soon as we really in earnest started looking for an agent, we had decided we wanted to go the agent route. I remember we had a conversation one time where Lewis was like, "What do you want to do with this book? Should we sell it on Amazon? Maybe we can get $5 a copy for it." And I was like, "Maybe, but first let's try the traditional way." I told him about a little bit of the practice that I had trying to find an agent with my friend Jim with Kindred Spirit. And I said, let me try this again. This time I'm really going to get serious. And I'm going to build a spreadsheet. We're going to get rejected a million times, but we're going to get us an agent this time. And so I sorted on my end. I basically sorted a whole lot of names into a hat, built a spreadsheet with them. Here's where things get interesting about that. So as 2010 progressed into 2011, and Lewis was starting to wrap up his work with his PhD, I was going to lunch. I went to lunch one day with my friend Sean Chasano. I don't know if you know him or not.
I do.
Yeah.
Another
Sean's
classmate.
Another great guy.
Yeah.
And we went to lunch, and Sean was aware of mine and Lewis's collaboration. He was just in love with the concept. And Sean, being just a very kind-hearted individual, wanted to help. And he did his own research behind the scenes about agents. And one day at Hideaway Pizza, he brings me a piece of paper, and it had a name on it. And he said, "This is your agent. You should check him out." And by this point, I was already getting lots of rejections. We were probably sitting at about 30 or 40 rejections at that point. And the name on the piece of paper was Brooks Sherman of Fine Print Literary Management out of New York. And I looked at Brooks Sherman. He was a young fella who was basically brand new. This was his first firm, and he wanted high adventure, things that sounded like Lost Causes could fit in his criteria on his website. So I sent him a query letter. Didn't hear back from him for quite a few weeks. Well, meanwhile, my fiance at the time, Alicia, and I were traveling. We traveled to Little Rock to her cousin's wedding. And I was commiserating with my wife, with my fiance at the time. And I said, I'm not getting anywhere. Lewis and I aren't getting any traction with these agents. I need to get in front of someone. And she looked up on, her phone right then and there. And she said, well, there is a conference in Austin, Texas next week. But if you want to go, and there's going to be some agents there. If you want to go, we really need to get our money down because it's filling up quickly. I said, let's do it. Let's just go. So the next weekend, with only 1 week to prepare, we paid $500 or $600 just to get in the door of this conference in Austin, Texas. And it was put on by the Texas, the Writers League of Texas. It's called the Agents and Editors Conference. And when I looked at the roster of agents who were going to be there, Brooks Sherman was going to be one of the agents who was going to be accepting pitches and speaking on panels. The same guy that Sean told me about on the piece of paper.
How about that?
So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So we didn't have the time or the means to actually acquire a dedicated pitch moment to sit down with Brooks. So at these conferences, you pay for time, essentially, and you get to pitch, editors and agents your story, and they'll say yay or nay. I didn't have that. Brooks's time was already spent. Like he was already booked up. But I knew that if I at least talked to him, cold called him a little bit, maybe was able to sneak in a pitch in the lobby, he might remember me. so we went on a whim that would work. And it worked.
Did you see him in the lobby or something?
I tracked him down in the lobby. When he first walked in, this was at the Hyatt Regent. I sound like such a stalker.
Well, this is resilience right here.
When I tell this story,
an easy industry.
It's really not. And when I tell this story, people are like, "So you stalked him?" Well, okay, you call it that if you want to. So I memorized what his face looked like. He looks a lot like Paul Rudd, if you want to know. And I sat in the lobby with some material. I was just absolutely out of my mind with nerves. This was the first time in my life that I would have approached a New York agent. And I was like, I don't know what to expect. He's probably going to, throw coffee in my face or something. So I see him walk in and I'm like, this is it. This is my chance. So I cold call him in the lobby. And I had already kind of like informed Lewis that this was going to be my plan. He was like, good luck. So anyway, I meet Brooks in the lobby. He was very, very nice and generous. And I said, I'm sorry for stopping you in the middle. You just got here. I don't want to be that guy, but I've sent you a query. I'm curious if you'd be interested in, and I gave him an elevator pitch in Lost Causes. And he nodded, and I thought at first he would just say, okay, well, thank you for your time. I got to go. But he didn't say that. He said, well, I have another client I'm supposed to meet who's stuck in Austin traffic. Let me go get signed into the conference, and we'll sit and we'll have some coffee and we'll talk more. And that's what you get when you actually, go to a place and get in front of someone who might be hungry for clients. It worked for me that time. So we sat down and we chatted over coffee a little bit. I told him a little bit more. I told him what was in my query letter. He apologized that he hadn't read the letter yet, so that was automatically a woo, not a flat out rejection. And he said that he would look at my sample that night while he was in his hotel room, and he would get back in touch with me and we would have breakfast that morning. And we did. We had breakfast that following morning, and he started using terms like we. Well, what we could do is we could lower Keach's age from 16 to 13, or we could do this, or we could do that. And the use of that pronoun really got me excited. And so I contacted Lewis after that breakfast with some really cool news. And I said, Lewis, he just asked for the full manuscript, and he has a lot of ideas for us on how to change the voice and tone, how to bring it down to more of a middle grade range, maybe upper middle grade. We could be in a good spot with this guy. Well, as it turns out, we needed to earn Brooks Sherman. Really? He gave us, he took a couple of months, not a whole lot of time, to read the book. He did read it. He provided copious notes, at least 4 or 5 pages worth of stuff that we could consider. He said, do you want to do that stuff? This is your project. You can either take this advice or leave it. But I think it's got potential. And so I shared the notes with Lewis. We talked about it and we said, well, what do we have to lose? Let's do it. Let's see if we can get him, and let's do this revision. So we embarked on another year-long revision. Now keep in mind too that this was 2013. If you look at 2011, back up 2 years, Lewis had already moved to Idaho. He was already a professor in Idaho by this point. Very, very busy. We had been attempting to get the Lost Causes sold that whole time. And so we kind of moved the base of our operations in 2011 to email. That was the last time in 2011, that was really the last time I had seen Lewis face to face. So we were just back and forth in email and on phone, and I would excitedly point out things that would happen with Brooks. And we embarked on about a year-long 2013 quest to rewrite the Lost Causes. And we did. We revised the entire book per Brooks's notes. We gave it back to him. He said, great, this looks good. I'll read this and I'll be back in touch. And he was back in touch. He got back in touch. In 2014, I believe it was April 2014, he said he really loved the revision. He saw some more room for improvement, and he gave me some more notes over the phone. But that was when I had some bargaining chips with Brooks, I believe. I told him, I said, if we do this next round, would you mind being our agent while we do it?
Yeah.
I was trying to be as absolutely Southern gentleman polite as I could.
Yes.
And he said, yes, I will offer you representation. So he offered us representation that day, and then we started our second revision with Brooks, this time with an agent, behind our corner.
Yeah.
So that's the advice I usually give students when they say, what's your process? What does it take? Don't be afraid to face rejection and also to just sink in the long haul for those revisions.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through about 2 years worth of back and forth with each other over email, eventually into Google Docs.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth, life getting in the way, careers getting in the way, living our lives, trying to get these revisions done, and finally giving Brooks something only to hear the words, I think we're ready. I think we're ready to approach a publisher with this. And within 2 weeks of hearing those words, he had sold the entire trilogy and what is now a 4th standalone book that we're going to be writing. So, yeah, it was a whirlwind. And all thanks to Sean Chisano's note that he handed me in Hideaway Pizza.
Story, really.
It really is. It's full of kismet and mystery and stalking.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so yeah, it's quite the story, and it's one that I know not a lot of writers get to experience, but I'm really glad that it went down the way it did. It's a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, it is. It's a great story. I love hearing about it. So we talked about this some before we started recording. In these books, there are Osage characters.
Yes.
Could you tell me about your reasons for incorporating that into the series and just what the process was for you in getting those details right?
Sure. Well, when Lewis and I were creating the Lost Causes outlines and character sketches, one of the first conversations we had about this was, how do we avoid in kidlit or young adult or whatever this was going to end up being, how do we avoid the stereotypes and the worst things that comes with the Western genre? We don't want that. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're not going to erase. That's off the table. We want to tell stories that involve kids of all communities, as many communities as possible, as many cultures as possible, coming together to fight this common evil, because this evil would just manifest over the land and just destroy everything in its path. But in order to do that, we knew we had to do research, to start with research, but not end with research. So where we started from was a point of what I call book research. And then we did geographical research, mostly heavily involving books. But I just looked at maps. I started looking at maps. We read a lot, and one thing we did notice was that in this area that we were telling in the Lost Causes, especially in 1850s, the Osage commanded a very important area. That's where they were. They lived in Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas. They commanded a large portion of that region. And not to say that other nations weren't just as important, but for our story, we pinpointed that the Osage would most likely be very crucial, and that by leaving them out, we would be erasing their history, and we don't want to do that. We knew we needed to do the proper research, but at the same time, we knew research probably wasn't going to cut it. We were trying to stay aware of the situation of representation in Kid Lit. That was something else that we were very quickly becoming aware of, is that representation is, A, it's very important, but B, it can be done very sloppily if you're not careful, and cause more damage than helping. So we didn't want to be that. Well, first thing we knew was that what we understood about our story is that the Osage probably were going to end up coming into our story as a presence, as characters, more of like book 2. So we needed to set the stage in book 1 for what Keach's life would be like. And Keach, in the books, his mother is a white woman. his father is half Osage, and he's raised by a white foster father. So we knew that he would be this white passing, for lack of a better term, white passing character who's raised with another white boy named Sam who learns how to fight. And they're learning how to fight and how to survive for a very specific reason. Well, we wanted basically book one to kind of be set up of why we would need a stronger Osage presence in book two. And so, in the story, without giving away spoilers, you find out that the Osage were friends with Paul Abner back in the day, and that they have information that the Lost Causes will need to find out as they progress through the story. So, we went to Brooks about this, and we talked about Brooks. We talked to Brooks about this need for us to be authentic, to have valid representation of this Osage culture in the book, not to overdo it or not to do something that felt shallow, but to do it respectfully. And he deeply encouraged us to do the work and to look beyond research if we could, talk to people. And so this was late 2015, a year before we went to publish with the books, that I realized, I didn't know at the time, that the Osage Cultural Center was 45 minutes away from my house. I was like, wow, the Osage territory is basically in my backyard. And I just wasn't aware of it. I was so ignorant about, who were around me. I know, I always appreciated the nations that we are taking their spots in Oklahoma, by living here. We stand on their land. But I didn't know that the Osage were that close to me. It just never really registered in my mind that I could drive 45 minutes away and actually visit with folks who were in that culture. And so once I discovered the presence of the Osage Cultural Center in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, I reached out in December 2015 to the director of the Cultural Center at that time. His name is Van Bighorst, very, very wonderful gentleman. And I talked with him on the phone. I told him what our project was and that we wanted to invite an Osage presence into this magical story. Automatically, was that problematic? Would that be okay? And he said, sure. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be, a fun adventure. I'd love to see what you have. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind reading the material. I sent it over to him. In the process of reading it, he wanted to bring others in, more of a team to be involved in that. His librarian at the time, Rebecca Brave, one of the cultural specialists who ended up becoming a very good friend of mine, and a person who has read every single word, Harrison Hudgens. He was involved in that initial team. We all met in Pawhuska one day. This would have been probably late 2015 or very early 2016. I can't remember. I can't recall if it was that December or January. But we met in the old Cultural Center building in Pawhuska. And we chatted about the story, the ins and outs of the story, for a couple of hours. We just sat and we talked about it. One of the very first questions that I asked was, I know that that a white writer could be in danger of disrespect if we talk about your nation in terms of magic. Or, there were things like that I didn't want to tell any sort of magical stories about Osage. I wanted to tell the magic that we had invented about, the story. But I wanted to not involve Osage mythology at all, or Osage myths or legends. That's not something I was interested in doing. So they actually welcomed the magic of the story. They said, it sounds like a lot of fun, but here's how you can make sure you can be respectful. So we talked about in book one, as you recall, they run across a bear in a cave. And it was Harrison who had indicated that, that the name for bear in Osage, that maybe if you knew a little bit of Osage language back then, was wasape. And so, we used that term. And that there wouldn't have been, Harrison told us, there wouldn't have been actual writing back then, but more of like a symbology and things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we were respectful to that as well. We talked about Keech, and is it respectful how we're using kitsch? They talked with me extensively about it.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, if he's raised by this foster father, then probably, you can bring him into the world of the Osage and learn more secrets if he's raised this way. So we had a lot of discussions about background,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So it was very, very hopeful conversations. It was a lot of fun. They really got behind me. That particular, I call them, sessions. That session that I had with them in their library, we actually learned a lot more about what we could do in book 2. Rebecca Brave showed us bending trees, and we talked about bending trees, and ways that we could be respectful, but also to make book 2 really vivid and talk about geography in Kansas and where they would be living in Kansas in 1855 near the Neosho River. They shared so much information with me, and I walked away with books from their library and maps and things like that. So I was my excitement for authenticity was renewed all over again.
Mm-hmm.
It was when Van Bighorst stepped down as cultural center director, and a woman named Addie Hudgens took over as the new cultural center director, that I really got tremendously excited, because the new director was on board. She wanted to read the books in the series, and she wanted to bring her cultural specialist, Jennifer Tiger, in. Harrison Hudgens is actually her Addie's brother. So they all work together as specialists of their culture. And that new team, Jennifer Tiger and Addie Hudgens, and the language department, folks like Charisse Lookout, they all looked at the material. And we're talking now about going also into book 2. They provided a blurb for the book. They read every word of book 2. The language department, particularly Charisse Lookout, worked extensively with me on language. I said, if we were to use authentic language, how would you like for us to do that? And so they provided a phonetic way of spelling the words and names. They named characters for us. There is a group of Osage people in book 2 called the Protectors. They gave us the names of the Protectors. We wanted to bring in a young girl into the adventure. Didn't really know what to call her at the time, so we talked about her name. And Addie said, well, I'll get together with the language specialists, and we'll talk about what the best name for her would be. And I remember we got an email back, and they said, we believe, based on her traits and based on everything you've described as her wanting to be in the story, that you should call her Strongheart. And so we were just elated. We were like, thank you so much. And they continue to this day to be very close cultural partners with us. Their work is kind of done now that we're 1 month away from publishing the book. I've contacted them via messenger before and text. I've called them. I've sat in their offices with them. I will put it this way on the record, that I will never be able to thank them enough for the work that they have helped us with, and for opening the door to 2 white writers who wanted to bring in Osage characters. They could have immediately said, no, we're not comfortable with that. But, by explaining to them, we're not going to tell your stories. We're going to treat your characters with respect. We're going to treat your language with respect. Will you be okay with us telling this magical adventure, but bring Osage characters into that? And they were very excited about it. Jennifer Tiger in particular told me she was very excited to have a young female character in the story. We're just deeply appreciative of what they brought to the Lost Causes saga. I've reached out to my editors about it. I've told them exactly the kind of work we've done, and the editors have reached out to them. And I consider them friends to this day, and will hereafter consider them very close friends. They've been wonderful.
Yeah, writing is a journey,
really
isn't
is.
it? And what you put down on the page, first pass and things like that. It just you've got to work on it and work through it, and be willing to spend so much time and get outside of a comfort zone.
That's right.
And go directly to to the source. Maybe that is easy for you as a journalist.
Well, that's true. I think my journalism years really helped inform the way I could talk with the Osage Cultural Center specialists. I didn't want to just perform interviews with them. I wanted to sit with them and visit and get to know them. Addie Hudgens actually, would sit with me for a long time, and we would just sit and talk about what ifs. And I get the impression that it was fun for them as well to talk about, these things from a fictional perspective. Like, what would these protectors be called? And like, what would, and so, yeah, going back to what we were talking about, you have to do more than research. I think in this day and age, that needs to hold true. I think that's a really, really important aspect of being a writer, is if you're going to write about any culture, do the work. You just have to do the work. I knew that book research was not going to be enough. I would never have felt comfortable about that. I wanted to sit and visit with them. I wanted to chat with them. And Lewis was always on board with it. And the McLelland team was always on board. And I told them, always on the record, if there is anything in these books that you don't appreciate or you feel steps over the line, it won't get published. And so they did. Every now and then they would correct me with things that we wouldn't do very well. I remember in book 1, for example, there was, I can't quite recall the specifics. I think it might have been clothing of some sort that we, talked about. And I remember Harrison Hudges gave us sort of a list of the clothing that an Osage warrior would have worn. No, I think it would have probably looked more like this, things like that. They would have done this, they would have done that. Here's a very good example of what I'm talking about. In book 2, there is a new monster that we introduced that we call the Camellia. And it's sort of this shape-shifting thing that's sort of our own creation. Basically based off, lycanthropy and werewolfism and all those funny things. Remember, I read a werewolf story when I was a kid. I was going to have a werewolf somewhere in my story.
You made it.
I made it. I got it in there. But this was more of our sort of lost causes kind of monster, something very specific to the story. And so in telling basically in describing the Camellia in an early draft of book 2, we called it a beast from the western deserts. And I was in such a blind spot about that I wasn't aware that there were people who live in the western deserts who believe in shapeshifters. And they believe in that sort of thing. And it was Charisse Lookout who spoke to me about that. And she said, you might want to generalize this more. Be very careful about things you say about those types of beliefs because they're real. And I apologized and I said, we will make this very general. We're not going to mention any sort of region. So now, as you read the books, you'll discover that a lot of the history and the origins of the monsters and things are very deep-seated in more of a very original kind of pretext. We really reached into the imagination a little bit more than just saying something is from the West. Because we realized that was problematic, and we wanted to make sure we weren't being problematic with even minutia, things like that. So, yeah, I would encourage any writer to just kind of like, when you feel like you're done with research, take one more step. Just keep going. Look around you, see what you can do to make things better. Go to the people if you can. Get those sensitivity reads. Talk in person with them if you can. Make them aware that you care, not that you're just there to make a buck off their culture. That's not what this is about. Just do the work, essentially. So I think at the end of the day, Lewis and I and our publishing team feel like we've done the work. And whether we've done it well, that's up for readers to decide, but we feel like we have done that work. And we've been as respectful and culturally appropriate as we possibly could be. And we just hope that carries through in the words. Any mistakes are obviously our fault. As we say in our author's note, if we make mistakes, it's our fault and no one else's.
What do you think you've learned about yourself as a writer over the years?
I've learned primarily that I have a lot more patience than I think I do. Mm-hmm. That the act of writing itself is a very patient process. You can't just expect to sit down in one evening and, like that magical person, magical Hemingway in your head that can sit down and write a novel in a night. It's not like that. In reality, you're going to sit and you're going to struggle with words, and you're going to have to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I learned how to be patient with myself as a writer. You can get very itchy and scratchy in your chair. You can walk away as much as you want, but you know that those words aren't going to get written until you write them. Mm-hmm. So it's crucial that as part of your personality, as part of your genetic makeup as an author, you understand that you're going to go through a lot of periods of impatience with your own mind. And you're going to feel very desperate to either walk away from that work or desperate to get something down. And I think, you can probably be okay by feeling that way, but just don't walk away from it permanently. Don't let that dark emotion get you so far away from the page you're never going to return to it. I walk away from a paragraph all the time. Mm-hmm. But I only walk away from it for at least a few hours, or the next day I'll try to return to it. So I think the most important thing I've learned as a writer is to trust my own process. Mm-hmm. Listen to that inner voice that tells me to be patient with the story, that it's not going to be just this utter pile of trash when I'm done with the revisional process. I'm going to have to go through some things to get that story there. And I'm just going to have to welcome that process.
Mm-hmm. And you've talked a lot about your process already, but I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more. So how do you know when something's done?
Oh, that's such
we talked about the creation of it and working through your revisions, and it sounds like maybe you're an outliner.
I am definitely an outliner.
Not a seat of the pantser.
I'm not a pantser. Yeah. I think I've only produced one or two works in my life that's been like seat of the pants.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely an outliner. When I know it's done is when I think I've hit all the narrative points and the characters feel fulfilled, mm-hmm. Or their particular aspect of their quest feels fulfilled in my mind. Lewis knows me really well as a writer by now, mm-hmm. that if I don't feel like something is right, I will tell him, I'm not jiving with this. There's something going on, and I think he's the same way. I think that there's something missing. I think that maybe we can't say the end until XYZ is fulfilled. A lot of it is just instinct. I know that's a cop-out, but to say that it's instinct, it might be the closest way I know of like just kind of knowing your story. I think if you know your story in and out, mm-hmm. if you've gotten to know your story by then and your characters, you should know that crucial moment when the plot basically has turned off, when all of the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed and your characters have fulfilled what they need to do. I think it's at that moment that you probably know that I just did my job. And I can put the end to it. If you haven't done that, you can consider ways to look at things. You can go back and you can sort of take a jump approach and read back what you have. If you get that feeling again, maybe after shelving it for 6 weeks, I like to do what Stephen King once advised: shelf the work for 6 weeks, or put it away for a designated amount of time. And when you come back to it and when you reread it, some character is going to scream at you. Or some word is going to yell at you for something you did wrong. You should see it. And so Lewis and I have taken that approach with Lost Causes, where we try to build in enough time after a draft to where we can kind of like, we usually have been on such a treadmill with the editors and with our deadlines, mm-hmm. that by the time we're done with the draft, we have to kind of throw it to the editor. But in the tossing it to the editor, we let that clock start. And we tell each other, did we tell the story? Mm-hmm. What is the editor going to say? And if we know what the editor will write in our edit letter, we know what we probably are going to need to do with the revision. So I don't know. it's just this nebulous thing of just kind of, you know, testing it. I think there are ways you can test it with a read, testing it by walking away from it, coming back to it, testing it with, you know, sort of analyzing it at the end and going, did I fulfill everything that my bullet said to do? You know, that's probably a very clinical approach to doing it, looking at your bullet list and seeing if you got all your check marks off. But that's one way of looking at it.
And everyone approaches it differently. So
drastically
it's good to
different.
hear how you do it.
Most of the time for me, it's just sort of this inherent knowledge that the story just got told. I feel like the characters are in a good place to say goodbye to at this point. And with book 3, which is about to come out on March 17th, I won't tell you how it ends, but I will tell you that there was a very decisive moment when Lewis and I both kind of felt like this gentle whisper in our souls where we were like, we just concluded that story in the absolute best way that we possibly could. That was it. That was the conclusion to the Lost Causes saga, and I think we just nailed it. So for us, it was sort of this inherent feeling, this sort of whisper that we did our jobs, you know. So, but it's going to be different for every writer.
Right. For every story that you're working on. It's its own world, isn't it?
Yeah, the next work that comes along might, you know, scream at me, you're going to have to write another chapter. You know, you just never know until you get in there and dig in.
Yeah. So what are you working on next?
Oh, that's a lovely question. So Lewis and I have I'm guessing about a year hiatus before we really are going to need to start drafting a new work. We're contracted for a 4th book with McLelland. And that's going to be that will be a really fun book to write because it's non-lost causes. But we want to kind of keep it sort of in a kind of world that feels like a Brad and Lewis story. So it's still going to be high action, things like that. But we probably don't actually have to start really writing that until early 2021. Meanwhile, we have some concepts. We really like one concept. We're going to be giving 3 concepts to our editor very soon. We have some concepts on the table. So right now, the work in progress for me and Lewis as a writing team is just to whittle away at those concepts to understand the stories as much as possible. However, alone in my off time, I am slowly but surely working on a solo project told in the Ozark Mountains.
Great. So
I'm kind of I want to return to that world of the Ozarks where I went to college. I have a really, really fun but possibly very haunting kind of story to tell for kids, again, set in that region. And so I've started my note-taking on it. Right now I'm playing it a little bit more loosely and a little bit more pantser kind of stuff with it, trying to find a tone, exploring a little bit of a voice. But fairly soon, I most likely will start bullet pointing an outline for this book. So I'm hoping that 2020 will involve preparing, extensive notes to give to our editor for the 4th book for McLelland, and also writing sort of this book that I've wanted to tell for a long time, but Lost Causes got in the way first.
Yeah.
If I can get that book told in 2020, then I'll go through the process of taking it to my agent, getting it sold, things like that. So I'm really excited about not only having a little bit of off time from being on a deadline, but just kind of writing on my own time and making fun notes with Lewis the way we did with Lost Causes back in 2010. So we're in kind of a fun spot right now. Of course, there's going to be a lot of promotion for book 3 come up in March. So we're going to be hot and heavy promoting the new book. Very busy.
Yeah. What words of advice or encouragement would you give to young writers, especially writers who live in Oklahoma, or I'm just going to throw in Arkansas, since 2 Arkansans here.
Of course.
Real places,
Yeah. I would say the very first thing that I would encourage you to do is to find your quiet place. Today, there are so many more distractions for writers than there were when I was a kid. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have 24-hour news cycles. We didn't have Netflix. None of that stuff existed. We didn't have internet when I was a kid. So I was able very, very freely and quickly able to find just sort of quietude, to sort of escape any other thoughts, just to go with a book, go somewhere, find some solace, and just read and write. I think kids these days, if wanting to be a writer, really need to try to figure out how to do that again. You can't be a writer if you're on your cell phone. You can't be a writer if you're always listening to, Spotify, unless you're the kind of writer who needs music. But my point is, I think you really need to just figure out a way to kind of take a step back and listen to your imagination. A lot of young writers will ask me, well, how do you do it? How do you find the time? How do you do this? I say, I make the time and I listen to my imagination. But the only way to do that is if you actively take a part in your own imaginative process. You can't just decide someday, oh, I've got a story in my head, I'm going to sit down and write. You probably ought to figure out your quiet place and go and think about that. And, take your notes in quiet and everything. Get away from your cell phone. I'll take out my cell phone a lot during a school visit and say, this is my number one killer of imagination. And I put it away. And I tell people that I just kind of walk away from stuff. If you've got a quiet place in your room, if you can tell your folks or your siblings or whoever is taking care of you, I need some quiet time for at least an hour for me to write my story, that would be appreciated. So I think that might be a little bit of advice for them. The second thing is to not be afraid to revise your work. As I mentioned, Lewis and I revised the book One of the Lost Causes multiple times, twice with our agent, at least twice with our editor. So don't be afraid to revise. I think that's probably the most crucial part of the writing process, to be honest. The first draft is awesome. It's beautiful. It's something that you created, but that's not the end of the process. And it's not even the best part of the process, because that first draft is just not going to be it. It's not going to be the end. You need to be able to understand your story in a way that you can know how to step back into it to improve it. And a lot of times that means that you might need to go back and read some more. Read good work, read bad work. That's my third point, is to read. Always be reading something, I read Ray Bradbury when I was a kid. I read, I tried to read Moby Dick as a kid. I read Robert Arthur as a kid. Grab as much as you can and just read it. Because I think reading widely and reading broadly, reading about multiple cultures, will give you an understanding about people, will give you an understanding about action and how to relay action on the page and the pacing of a scene, things like that. A lot of it might be instinctual for some, but I think that the act of writing and revision is very much non-instinctual. I think you can learn how to do it. There are some people who are good at pacing a scene, probably only because they read a lot of scenes that did it well or that did it poorly. So I'd say go to your quiet place, find that time to do your writing, and then allow that first draft to come out, but don't feel like it's the only one. Don't share that first draft with anybody. Don't talk about that first draft with anybody. Allow that first draft to be your little diamond that you're going to polish in secret. After you feel good about that revision, that's when you show it to the world. And that's when it's hopefully publishable for you. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great advice. So we've covered a lot today. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
I just wanted to say on the record that I really appreciate you bringing up that we were able to talk about Jim.
Yeah.
And Jim's mentorship really means a lot to me. I will always remember him as probably one of my best teachers. And also thank you very much for the questions about the OSH Cultural Center. I really, really love it when people ask me questions about our pursuit of cultural authenticity, because I don't want to get any wires crossed about that sort of thing. I want people to be aware that we did do the work, for good or ill, whether it's good or not on the page. We definitely went to the sources. So I really appreciate you bringing those things up. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
Yeah.
I probably rambled a lot too much, but
You're fine. Yeah. Well,
but thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. This has
So
been great.
polite. It's the Southern way, y'all. From
Maybe I
it's
don't
the
know.
Arkansas way. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time
Thank
today,
you, Emily.
Brad.
I appreciate it.